Malaysia. So, as for the next session, there will be a forum entitled The Right to Clean Air, addressing haze pollution in Malaysia. So now for the opening speech will be delivered by the SUHAKAM Commissioner, Tengku Muhammad Fauzi Tengku Abdul Hamid. I now welcome him to the floor.
Selamat tengah hari. Ampun tuanku, beribu ampun, sembah patik harap diampun. Izinkan patik meneruskan ucapan ini di dalam bahasa Inggeris. His Royal Highness Tengku Hasanal Ibrahim Alam Shah Ibni Al-Sultan Abdullah Riyatuddin Al-Mustafa Billah Shah, Tengku Mahkota Pahang, and Pemangku Raja Pahang, Honorable Mr. Yep Sano, Executive Director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia, and colleagues and friends, Mr. Q as well, whom I've met before, whom we shared some knowledge together, where I'm still learning on this issue actually. Ampun Tuanku, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to welcome you all to the Forum on Rights of Clean Air. It's an honor to have you as our guests for this forum. We're here because we know that air pollution is one of the biggest threats to global health, and we need to do something about it, and urgently. Let me remind you of some of the numbers. Air pollution kills 7 million people each year. Around the globe, 9 out of 10 people breathe air that has been polluted by traffic emission, industry, agriculture, and waste incineration. Until to date, up to 1/3 of deaths from heart attack, stroke, lung cancer, and chronic respiratory diseases are due to pollution. No one escapes from the womb to the grave. Some of our children will not reach their full potential because of exposure to air pollution in the womb and in early life. Some of our parents will die early because of exposure to it throughout their lives. The prolonged impacts of haze pollution experienced, especially over the last 2 decades, have become a serious concern in the face of this devastating phenomenon that has affected the well-being of Malaysians and the economy. The Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, or SUHAKAM, has been consistent in calling for effective enforcement of the laws, including stiffer penalties for perpetrators of pollution, in order to protect the people's rights to clean air, which is our topic today. On March 2022, SUHAKAM, in collaboration with CERAH, Anti-Haze Action Coalition, organized a roundtable discussion to gather the diverse perspectives of subject matter experts, legal advisors, and key stakeholders in order to develop concrete plans to address the issue of domestic and transboundary haze pollution. This RTD focus on highlighting the root causes of haze pollution from agricultural, land use change, peatlands, and meteorological concerns on its impacts on the economic, health, and environmental aspects. This provided the foundations for an in-depth study into fundamental gaps in existing Malaysian and regional legal frameworks that result in a lack of access to justice and information, public participation, and governance. The RTD promoted the protection of society's human rights to a safe, clean, and healthy environment free of air pollution through a broad discourse on ideas for solutions. There is an urgent priority for all of us. We cannot wait until later. We have many of the solutions already in place, so actions are needed to improve air quality, particularly those targeting short-lived climate pollutants such as black carbon, and some of the most cost-effective measures that can be taken to address the near-term climate change. In addition, they provide significant health benefits. I mean these, short-term actions. On this note, I would like to reiterate SUHAKAM's suggestion for the government to amend Article 5 of the Constitution to include environmental protection as part of the express basic rights, to show Malaysia's commitment to uphold the environmental justice of its citizens. In conclusion, I would say that the time has come to act together because every breath we take depends on it. With this, I wish you all a productive forum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you Tengku Muhammad Fauzi, Tengku Abdul Hamid for the delightful opening speech. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yap Sano, Greenpeace Southeast Asia Executive Director, to give his keynote address.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this forum, but also welcome to the Rainbow Warriorship Tour of Greenpeace. I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of Tuanku Hasanal, the Crown Prince of the State of Pahang. Thank you very much for joining us. And an honor for me as well to be together with good friends from SUHAKAM, Tengku Muhammad Fauzi, our good friend Jayao, and Dr. Helena Varki, and also our colleague from Greenpeace, Heng, who would moderate this forum. I hope everyone there who's enjoying all of the exhibits could find time to join us here and listen to this very important conversation. My name again is Yeb Sanyo. I'm the Executive Director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia. I lead the diverse operations of Greenpeace across the entire Southeast Asia region. And I am very glad and pleased to be given this opportunity to address you today and talk about a very important issue of clean air as it relates to human rights. And also as we welcome the visit of the Greenpeace flagship, the Rainbow Warrior. Please join me, of course, in thanking SUHAKAM and all our partners from CERAH for all of the efforts for forming a movement that comes together in response to the persistent, chronic pollution that affects so many people and communities. Now, allow me to go back a little bit in time, way back in time, to 3 billion years ago. So about 3 billion years ago, the very first photosynthetic organisms appeared on Earth. Just imagine that and visualize that. And that resulted in the start of the accumulation of oxygen. But it was not until about 500 million years ago that the Earth developed an atmosphere that we would consider as breathable for the creatures on this planet. This was around the event that's called the Cambrian explosion. Of course, the first Homo sapiens appeared or were recorded by fossil record at the earliest human ancestors to just around 315,000 years ago. So let's fast forward to today. We breathe air that is about 21% oxygen. But take note, it has been like this for the last 500 million years. The air, the atmosphere had been stable. And it's breathable. It allowed life to flourish on this planet. Save, of course, for some cataclysmic events that might have changed the composition of the atmosphere temporarily. So again, The air we breathe today, the composition of that air had been stable for the last 500 million years. But in the last 100 years, the human species managed to change that drastically. And as we acknowledge humankind's most precious link to life, we reflect on the state of the very air we breathe. Literally, I think the single most important thing required for our existence. Of course, we need food, we need water, and a human being can survive without food for several weeks. I've tried a hunger strike for 14 days, and yeah, you can survive for several days without food. Some has gone as long as 40 days without food until they came dangerously close to a tragic end. But generally, an average human being can survive without water for 3 days. In 2021, the record was set for the longest breath hold underwater. It lasted for 24 minutes. But that's some super athlete who did that. Generally, the average human being would start to lose consciousness in just a few minutes without air. And so humans are aerobic beings. We cannot survive without air. And if we pollute that air, we're actually compromising our ability to survive or ability to have lives that are healthy and well. So as such, clean air is not just a basic right, as we emphasize well enough today. It is a basic right, but it is literally our life force, without which we are compromising our own survival and our own well-being. You know, it took, as I mentioned, it took billions of years for the Earth to have the perfect combination of gases that would allow the complexity of life on this planet to happen. But it took us, humans, a very short span of time to destroy that. So every year in our current time, as Tengku Fauci has emphasized, an estimated 7 million people die prematurely. 7 million people dying too early because of unclean air. I mean, a lot of people already die of other things, like illnesses, diseases. But just to die prematurely because you're breathing air that is polluted, that's really tragic. And in fact, 9 out of 10 people around the world breathe unclean air. Most of them, I would have to underscore, in low and middle income countries, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable groups. So air pollution has become the largest environmental risk factor for human health. Together with the climate crisis is probably one of the most pervasive, most serious problems that humanity has ever faced. And together with the climate crisis and all of the fossil fuel pollution and the burning of forests and peatlands, and also resulting in air pollution, it's all a big mess. It is a complex, compounded crisis, and that's what we find ourselves in. This morning when we welcomed the crew of the Rainbow Warrior in this same venue, I emphasized that Greenpeace often is seen as an organization that speaks too much about the bad things. We say that the forest is disappearing, the climate is in crisis, the tigers are getting extinct, and air quality is really bad. Of course, that's the truth. And that's the kind of leadership we need today when we talk about human rights, especially because indeed all of these environmental issues affect people, real lives, real livelihoods. And then the challenge for us as well, not just for Greenpeace, but for all of us, is to bring in that kind of leadership where we're able to tell the truth, speak truth to power, tell the problem as it is, and tell the whole world that in fact we have a big problem, but balance that with the kind of leadership that inspires people to take action, that mobilizes people into action. And every time I wake up, I think of the word impact, and maybe you can think about that as well. Impact for me stands for, today when I wake up, I must move people to act for change today. So that's something you'd like to embrace as a duty. Now, I'm reminded of, I said this earlier as well, but you might have heard people say, you don't know what you have until it's gone, right? You don't know what you have until it's gone. I see some of you nodding because that's easy to understand, right? That's the biggest lie you've been ever told. Because if you think you don't know what you have until it's gone, that's not true. Because you know what you have. We all know what we have, like the beauty of nature. We were having conversations with Tuanku earlier about the beauty of Pahang, for example. We know what we have. We know the beauty that we've been given, all of the wealth of the planet. But the truth is, we never imagined it will be gone so quickly. So we never thought we'd lose clean air as well in this context, in such an epic way. I mean, who would have thought that we would be living? I mean, the Earth is so huge, and then we live on a planet where it's hard to breathe. We live in cities where we're choking. Now, as I said, it's not just our job to talk about the problem, it's also our job to do something about it. And so about 15 months ago, in December of 2021, Greenpeace and a broad alliance of civil society organizations filed a pioneering complaint at the Malaysian Human Rights Commission, the SUHAKAM, as a countermeasure to address the chronic and persistent haze pollution that's affecting so many people. This is the first ever complaint filed in Malaysia to combine environmental issues with human rights. And you know why that's so important? Because some people don't care about the environment. Let's be honest about that. Many of you who've come here to see the Greenpeace ship, you probably care about the environment. But a lot of people care about what they will eat for today, how to find a job, how to get their children through school. And that's very fair enough. But when we start talking about the environment as part of your basic human rights, freedom from fear, freedom from harm, then it becomes very important to so many people. Now, so a study about 2 years ago by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air and Greenpeace Malaysia found that an estimated 32,000 avoidable deaths. 32,000 avoidable deaths. I don't know how many people died of COVID in Malaysia, but 32,000 avoidable deaths occur in Malaysia every year as a result of ambient air pollution. That's really sad because you don't want people to be dying just by breathing air. And so the estimated annual economic cost as a result of healthcare, because people have to go to the doctor, and medical spending and losses in economic productivity when they fail to do their jobs and go to the office and go to work, following premature death as well, is estimated at 303 billion ringgit, or about 70 billion US dollars. That represents 20% of Malaysia's GDP annually. So imagine 20% of Malaysia GDP goes up in smoke because of air pollution. So the world's air is alarmingly very polluted. And just to share with you a few more things that might alarm you, but then we talk about solutions as well. According to the World Air Quality Report in 2022, there are only 13 countries in the world that pass the World Health Organization's recommended PM 2.5 guidelines of 5 micrograms per cubic meter. I'm not going to mention those 13 countries. Most of them are small islands in the middle of the ocean. That's why they have clean air. But Malaysia's PM 2.5 value is way too high above the global acceptable limits, which is 5 micrograms, as I said. Malaysia is at 17.7 micrograms per cubic meter. So to be exact, this is the average value of annual exposure across the 62 monitoring stations across Malaysia. So we work together with allies, with SUHAKAM and with CERAH to fill in the gaps and the challenges in realizing what should be viewed as people's rights, as constitutional rights of a person to have a clean and safe environment. So we are happy to know that after 1 year, things are moving. And we hope that with the recommendations from SUHAKAM, the Parliament will be able to strengthen the legislation of Malaysia by strengthening the recognition of environmental rights and strengthening the air quality governance of this country. Strengthening the governance as well of transboundary haze pollution, because not all of the pollution comes from within Malaysia. And that needs to be tackled seriously. And that can only be done through cooperation across borders. And strengthening as well the business accountability, the accountability of industry with respect to how they protect and observe human rights. So even though air pollution is a universal health problem that affects everyone in this planet, it's really, really important for us to understand that the risks are not even. And it's not distributed fairly among the population. And those groups that are at greater risk of harm are those who are already poor, who are marginalized, and who are struggling in life. And clean air, therefore, becomes an issue of justice and fairness. It is a matter of justice, especially because those most affected, like the climate crisis, those most affected are those who are least responsible for causing the problem. And while it's increasingly become clear that while we breathe the same air, like right now we're breathing the same air, we really don't, because the most vulnerable groups in our society, and if you look at the global context, those in the developing countries breathe much dirtier air than the richer countries. It is not any more comforting to know that governments and industries are complicit to this air crisis, and the international community is nowhere near mustering the political will to confront the issue. So as such, we can say that we have one sky, but we don't have one world. There's no unity on this issue. And we need to join forces with all those who believe we can change this and avert the climate crisis together with the air pollution crisis, which is not isolated from all of the compounded multiple crises that we face, and the deterioration of the dignity of human well-being. So we join hands with those who are demanding solutions to tackle this issue and bring back clean air and dignity to the lives of people. My dear friends, the Greenpeace flagship, the Rainbow Warrior, is here to help us spread more awareness on this issue. And may this momentous gathering as we are here today unite all of us in purpose and allow us to dream of cleaner skies. Finally, let me conclude by saying that now we're starting to meet face-to-face and organizing all of these gatherings. The disruption brought to us by COVID-19 is leading our societies to challenge our present and think about our future differently. I hope we see it like that. All of us must put all of our weight behind trying to make this disruption work for changing society as we have known it. Society that is individualistic, unfair, unequal, nature-destroying, mostly profit-driven, towards a society that we need it. Open, caring, just, more equal, peaceful, and in harmony with nature and with public good as a driving force. It might sound difficult, but the moments, it might sound very challenging, but the moments where things can change are often difficult to see when we are in that situation. But we are in a generation that is more digitally connected than any generation before us. And we can work together across borders and across cultures like never before. And therefore, we must remain hopeful because our strength lies in our collective desire, willingness, and ability to take action. The pandemic, as I said, unprecedented in our lifetime, has taught us lessons. We have learned lessons, right, from the pandemic. I hope we have. Sometimes it's not clear whether we have. Sometimes we think things are going back to normal and maybe worse than before. Like you see, traffic is worse than pre-pandemic, but I think we learned lessons. So are we gonna let those lessons go to waste? I would say not today. Today, we're determined to dream of a better world and to take action to claim back the air that we breathe. Thank you very much, and more power to all of you.
Thank you to Mr. Yapsano for the enthusiastic speech and infos given concerning our environmental important matters. Now, I would like to pass the mic to Mr. Heng, our moderators of today's forum. Thank you.
Oh, mic test, okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, you can call me Hanks. I'm a campaigner and also the moderator of these forums. And also thank you everyone for joining this forum. And also thank you Tuanku and his team to join us together. Okay, before that, I want to share you a story. Okay, when I was a young boy, many years ago, I remember in 1997, I was in Standard 1. And then there was a very serious air pollution problem, jerebu. That is the first time I know about this word, jerebu. And then I was told that a lot of people have to wear N95 face masks. And that time we were poor. Because that time like N95 mask, like 50 cents. 50 cents that time is very expensive. And then only like people poor like us, like only wear like simple, the cheap face mask. That is the first time I get to know like those who owns N95 face mask is for rich people lah, orang kaya yang baru mampu tanggung lah for this face mask. And I got to know all this N95 face mask not because of COVID pandemic, it's during the jerebu. Then I slowly understand that this jerebu happened for many years. After that, I know that, okay, in 1997, it happened so serious. And then 2015, it's come back again. And then 2019, and it became so serious, and even it turned into a political issue, like Malaysian government blaming Indonesian government blaming Singapore, and then Singapore blaming the whole supply chain problem. So, which means this is a very serious issue, and it looks like we can't, I want to solve it. I think a lot of people want to solve it, but can't do anything. Therefore, coming back, together with groups of the civil society organizations such as CERAH and a lot of people, we work together with SUHAKAM to publish, we are in the process. We had a roundtable discussions about these clean air forums, and then we try to figure out what is the best solutions to solve this air pollution problem. Okay, before I start, I want to introduce the three moderators. Sorry, I'm a moderator. I want to introduce the three panelists. Okay, these three panelists also have quite special for me. Let me start with the first one. Okay, this person, he just had a ship tour with me. And yeah, he just come and just he say hi to me. Okay, we just had a ship tour. And after the ship tour coming back, he said, oh, what do you think about the ship tour? And he said, like, it's amazing. And then we think that we need to do something to protect environment, right? Because the environment is so clean. The air is so clean. The water is so clean, but we are witnessing it's turning to be very dirty, very kotor. We need to do something. So let us welcome the Tengku Fauzi, the SUHAKAM Commissioner. And after that, he will share some findings. Yeah, let's welcome Tengku Fauzi. Yep, please have a seat. Okay, the second one. Okay, when I get to know about transboundary haze pollution issue, I just quickly search Google search. When I was a student, I just say, okay, how to solve any academics or any lecturer who focus on this transboundary issue. Then I found out that, oh, there are transboundary experts from University Malaysia. So this is Dr. Helena Walkley. So every time I have all this transboundary haze issue problem, I will look for her. So let us welcome Dr. Helena Walkley, the panelist number 2. Okay, this is the number 3 one. Okay, this guy, every time I have an environmental law issue, I will go and disturb him. I will go and kacau him. And then every time, even at night, if I encounter any questions, I need advice about environmental law, so I will always go and look to him. And he's very kind enough to explain all the details, to explain to me in detail, what is the problems of this environmental issue, what is the loophole, and how can we fix together. So let us welcome Mr. Q Jayal, environmental lawyers. Okay. Oops. Okay, so which means in this, okay, so we have our, we will start our forum today. And in these forums, each of the panelists will be given like 10 to 15 minutes to talk about what they think about this clean air. Clean air, it looks very simple, but it's also very far away, right? Okay? So what is the finding? Like in 2021, we found, like civil society organizations found a complaint to Human Rights Commission's SUHAKAM. And we have like roundtable discussion with many experts, various stakeholders to solve this problem together. So maybe let us ask welcomes Tunku Fauzi to share about his, he give his thoughts. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And good afternoon to everyone. I'm Tunku. Thank you for coming here and, you know, brightening up the atmosphere here with your presence. I think Mr. What's the name? Yeah, actually I wanted to start with the event that Mr. Jab had already taken from me, which is the event of photosynthesis billions of years ago, you know, where the plants, the green forests and all that emitted oxygen through this process. He had already elaborated on it, so I suppose I need not elaborate it anymore. But as he said, we fast forward, and now we have this issue of dirty air. And air, I think, just like water, which is part of the climate environmental situation or factors that we are facing now. As people are saying, water is blue gold now. In fact, it has been commercialized in places like Australia and all that. Air, because we cannot see air, it's more intangible. So many people don't realize the danger that we are currently in. I've got some statistics here. For example, 99% of global population breathe air that exceeds air quality limits that threaten their lives. I think that was mentioned by Mr. Jab just now. And Malaysia's air level is far beyond whose limit. And as I saw reports in CNN weather forecast, Malaysia has always been in the orange. Never green. But Singapore and Australia, most of the time, they appear to be green. So we have really issues here that needed to be looked into. And there is another statistic by Lancet Commission in 2015, where its report recorded death caused by modern forms of pollution have increased by 66%, which attributes to 9 million deaths each year globally. So you can see the seriousness of the situation. Another statistic is from the World Bank in 2016 report, which estimated that global costs attributable to air pollution exceeds US 5 trillion, which is a really mammoth in amount actually. And of course we also had this haze smog issue, which are transboundary, a problem to Southeast Asia since 1980s. Although it seems like a past, has been event, but it is still actually still relevant today, and we cannot sit still and be contented about it. The other thing is the UN General Assembly historic 2022 resolution declaring rights to healthy environment that include clean air, water, and stable climate. So I think there is this issue because I come from SUHAKAM. So, it concerns mainly human rights. And to be clear, SUHAKAM is not an NGO because many people seem to be mistaken about SUHAKAM. SUHAKAM is a statutory body enacted under the SUHAKAM Act or the Human Rights of Malaysia Commission Act 1999. And it has a unique position where it has special powers to advise and also do things like organize forums, education, and also meeting civil society organization and as well as non-governmental organizations. So we have these powers where when we hear from these stakeholders, we have this power to recommend to the government to take action. And but unfortunately our powers are persuasive only. We don't have any enforcement powers. So it is hoped that with the present government, which is keen to do reform of institutions, including SUHAKAM, we hope that the government will reform the laws, including the SUHAKAM Act, to give us more bite when we deal with issues of human rights, including climate and, of course, the right to clean air. I think I'll stop there for the time being.
All right. Thank you, Tengku Fauzi, for your sharings. Yeah, I think what you have shared is quite important because we need need more power. You need constitutional change, and then we need some strengthening the enforcement mechanisms on that. Yeah, thank you for that. So I think maybe we can share to the next step, talk about how do we move to the environmental law perspective. Maybe Jaya, you can share your perspective, especially from SDGs, and how do we fix this? Yeah, over to you.
Thanks so much, Heng. So maybe I'll touch a little bit about maybe I'll focus on transboundary haze pollution, because I think using transboundary haze pollution that we Malaysians are familiar with, we could share on some of the things as we from civil society in CERAH, which is the civil society organization that Dr. Helena and me and some friends here spontaneously formed organically in 2015 from the serious haze episode in 2015, and then with more members in 2019. So our journey and from different lenses of looking at that problem, I think helps us see the gaps in the system around the governance of our air quality. And I think it's also very useful because a lot of these gaps that we look at relate to generally our gaps in environmental governance. So it relates to water, land use, the quality of our soil, and so it touches all the other things that are crucial for life and quality of life and well-being. So from the transboundary angle then, when we look at, so let's start from the most familiar thing that Malaysians are familiar with, which is transboundary haze. So we have to put up with weeks and often months of having our lives limited by haze pollution, and then changing our lifestyle and how we work and whether our children get to go to school or not because schools are closed, because the air quality is too poor, limiting ability to exercise, work out, do work outside, etc. So we're familiar with that. And so from that angle, we Malaysians, the narrative around transboundary haze pollution would have been it's fires coming from Indonesia. And so the Malaysians would look to the Malaysian government and see how are you going to solve this problem? And the government, through our politicians, would say, we are going to scold the Indonesians. So that has been the old narrative that we are familiar with previously. But over time, as civil society mature, as members of the public mature, we understand that it's not really a one nation versus another nation problem. It's not a geopolitical conflict. It is essentially about where the haze is coming from, how is it caused. And so if we actually look at that and look at evidence and look at data, then we start to understand through this fog caused by the lack of information and lack of data, is we start to see that why are there fires in these plantations? And then we start to read that it's plantations, mostly they are palm oil plantations. And then why are palm oil plantations catching fire, right? Because we are familiar with palm oil plantations. They don't catch fire and burn for months. So what's happening? And then as we look into the research, we understand that because of the rapid growth of the palm oil industry as a key pillar for the economies of the countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and in this region, we have expanded our land use by converting our land, more and more land for palm oil plantations. And so when we have used up the best land, we start to move towards the less optimum land. And much of our land here are peatlands. So peatlands is our tanah gambut. Yeah, so we're the marshy, swampy areas. So what plantations have done is they've applied for land, and the government then gives out these suboptimum, unsuitable lands for plantation, and they change the category of these lands into plantation lands. So what happens is then we change the land use, and then the plantations come in because they have permission to do their plantations now. And with that, they have to use their industrial processes to transform the land. Now, because it is tanah gambut, it is very wet, it's very soggy, and it's very spongy. So what they have to do is they have to drain these peats. That means they have to change a bit terraforming, if you play Minecraft, right? So they have to change the landscape by draining it, by altering this. So what happens is the gambut then dries out, and what you have is you have a few meters of dry, combustible material. So this is like a cinder box, because we also have our dry seasons, and when it dries out, it catches fire really easily, and there are lots of these kinds of land, right? Because it's been disturbed with, it's been prepared for palm oil. And then because there are humans there, humans use fire often, and there are different humans on the ground sometimes, because sometimes when government give out these lands, there are locals who are staying in these lands. And this is another dimension on, so activists and researchers, we call it land grabbing issue. Sometimes when government gives out a land, there are local dwellers, there are indigenous communities on these lands, there are squatters. So that's another complication that also contributes to land use as well as causing of fires. Now, so when there are humans doing activities there, fires can begin. And then once fires begin, they burn, and they burn deep underground, and it's very hard to put out. So that's a technical challenge. So then the next part about the causation of haze is these smoke then have the ability to travel great distances because they are of fine particulate size. And so the air can carry them for hundreds of kilometers, and they actually reach, if it's from Sumatra, they actually can travel through the air down to, up all the way north to southern Thailand. So researchers actually have kind of like chemical fingerprinting of actual haze particles, and they can tell that where they have come from. And so they can do that, and which is why we experience what we experience. So I say all that to point out who may be, maybe I don't want to use the word responsible, who may be contributing to this situation. Decisions around land use and then people who are carrying out the industry, in this case largely is palm oil, but also pulp and paper, also is in increasing industry that's involved, and supply chain, right? In the palm oil industry, there are lots of different businesses that are involved it's a complex supply chain, and they have different roles. There are palm oil mills, there are planters, there are smallholders, etc. And so identifying how people deprioritize environmental harm helps us then rethink how can we push the prioritization of environmental rights in all their decision making. In the decision making around land use, so in the equivalent of a Malaysian state, maybe at the EXCO level, making decisions around changing the land use of a particular lands, analyzing and understanding the suitability. Within the boardroom of businesses, reprioritizing environmental rights. So thinking about it in this way, so we can see that there were gaps, and we can think of the possible solutions of how do we reconcile this struggle of interests, economic interests, and creating jobs, and the interest of having clean air to breathe. So the legal system needs to be improved so that the rights are prioritized as a duty, not as an afterthought, and not as a matter of discretion. So the key that I think when Tunku Fauzi talked about recognizing our environmental rights in the Constitution, what it does is it elevates environmental rights, that means persons' rights to a clean environment, from a matter of discretion, that means say a state executive, a state EXCO would only need to consider it, but they have a discretion. If it is in the Constitution, what it does is it creates a duty to consider. And so the processes then become much more robust and much more inclusive, perhaps. So I think I'll stop here first, just to highlight on that one. So thank you, Heng.
Okay, thank you, Jayao. Maybe a quick questions to use that, since there are so many all these, air pollution problem, not just transboundary haze problem, maybe can you give some example? What are the best practices of other countries to tackle all these air pollution problem?
I think one of the key progress that countries can do is to have an actual legal framework for air pollution. That means put it into law. So, and that law will then compel the government institutions and agencies to actually themselves have policies, programs, and rules to actually compel the people within their jurisdictions to meet those air standards. So have a legal framework on air quality. So we lack a holistic air governance framework. So I think in the last WHO, I think UNDP study, I think 2 years ago, so many countries yet to do this, and Malaysia as well. So we need to have that. I think that would be a key structural change. Thanks.
Right. Okay. Thanks for your answer, Jayao. Okay. Maybe we can move to the next panelist. Maybe like Dr. Helena Walkie. Maybe you can share your perspective. As academics from University Malaysia. Okay. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Heng. So Heng did come to see me many years ago as he was just starting out his very lucrative career in Greenpeace. He's the big man here in Malaysia now, and I'm very happy to have known him from way back when. So that was very opportune for me. Thank you to the panelists as well, and for Greenpeace and SUHAKAM for organizing this, for all of you here, Tuanku. So I will talk a bit about what I've done in my research and maybe some lessons that we can consider as we move forward. The sort of ultimate aim for this is for us to take the SUHAKAM recommendations further, and all of these recommendations that we are trying to put together It's very much based on research, based on a lot of people coming together and thinking about it and sharing knowledge. So I'll try to share a bit of my knowledge here today. So as we've heard before, Malaysia's air quality is already bad. We are not living in a country that has clean air anyway. So it makes it even worse that we have certain periods in the year where we have an even worse situation. So we are living in a baseline polluted country in terms of air. And then we have this every few months or every few weeks of the year where we have an even worse situation for haze. So this is the different layers of our challenges in this country with regards to air pollution. So Mr. Yap actually asked you all to think back in time, few 100 million years. But I think for all of us, we can also think back, not so far, but I think many of us were already around during the 1997 haze, like Heng mentioned. And actually, transboundary haze has been around even before that. So 1997 was the big one. But if you look back at the data, at the newspaper articles, we first started talking about transboundary haze in Malaysia and in Asia since the early 1980s. To be specific, the New Straits Times first mentioned the phrase in 1983. And personally, for me, I have been studying it for about 15 years now. So that's a big chunk of my professional career, almost all of it actually. And basically, these two time frames, 1983, it's 4 decades, and 15 years, you know, these are really long time frames to focus on something that technically is resolvable. Haze is a resolvable problem, right? So actually, we should be over it by now, but we are not. And the reason for this is, as what Mr. Jaya also mentioned, is because haze is actually a very much political problem. So I will try and start with that. There may still be, I think this is a bit more well known nowadays, but there may still be this impression that haze is somehow a natural phenomenon. So this is something that we have to really make sure that people understand. Even though haze is related to meteorological factors, atmospheric factors. So for example, I think most of you have heard of El Nino, La Nina years. Some years are wetter than others in this region. Some years are drier. So usually when it's a dry year, you will have bigger fires. If a fire happens, it becomes bigger, it's harder to put out. If it's a wetter year, you know, you have rain. So even though there are fires, it won't last as long and you wouldn't have the haze. So meteorological factors like this will affect the extent to which haze becomes an issue for that particular year. How many countries are affected, how long it will stay around. But the underlying issues, the causes of haze, as Mr. Jaya said, is actually anthropogenic, or it's human. Yeah, so it is things like land use change, like preparation for plantations and all this. So Mr. Jaya has already gone very much into that. But I will say that, you know, since the beginning of when I was working on this issue 15 years ago, to where we stand now, there has been a lot of improvement in terms of practices on the ground. So in the past, you would have a lot of cases where a lot of even large plantations would physically light fire to land, because that was just the cheapest way to clear land, to prepare it for palm oil or for pulp and paper plantations. Nowadays, we don't see that as big problem anymore in that sense. People are not physically lighting fire as much. The reason being because there's more awareness of this issue. People know that, you know, palm oil is part of the problem. Pulp and paper is part of the problem. So these companies know they are being watched. And this is good because then they are being more careful in what they do. So at least in these respects, there has been movement. So I mention this because I want people to be a bit optimistic, to show that, you know, with pressure, with attention, things like this can be improved. Companies can be pressured or can be compelled to act more responsibly. So all these are good. But the underlying problem still remains. For example, a lot of these plantations are still in peatlands, which are naturally fire prone when drained. So the best practices, even if plantations are extremely careful, you know, there is still always this risk. The risk of fire is always there. And then when you have communities that come in and set up kampongs around the plantations, when the plantations build roads into their areas, and when you have issues like land use rights, when villagers believe that their land was taken away wrongly, they use fire as an arson tool. You know, there are all of these other supporting circumstances that are all kind of tied into the corporate activity in this area. So what I'm trying to communicate is that it's not just necessarily the physical act of lighting the fire. There are so many other drivers, political, social, economical drivers that make these landscapes very sensitive. So this is why we need to be really careful and really, focused on really handling things on the ground and understanding things on the ground. And this includes, like what Jaya said and what we are proposing, hopefully in the SUHAKAM recommendations, about reform of specific laws, specific frameworks to enable agencies and governments to tackle it right on the ground. So that is with, in terms of the situation on the ground. I will touch a bit more on ASEAN in particular. So we all know that haze is a regional issue, right? So it's not just a Malaysian issue, it's not just an Indonesian issue. When it's really bad, it can reach almost all ASEAN countries. And actually we have a similar but different problem also in the north. Our Mekong brothers and sisters there, they also have the problem of haze. It's slightly different in terms of slightly different drivers. However, it is very similar in a lot of ways as well. So it is very much an ASEAN issue in that sense, because we have all of these countries affected by haze, and additionally, the causes, the drivers are also transboundary, are also regional. So for example, Jaya mentioned about the importance of the palm oil sector in this. For Indonesia, Indonesia is the largest producer of palm oil in the world, and Malaysia is number 2. We have Indonesian companies in Indonesia. We also have Malaysian companies, we have Singaporean companies, we have companies from all over the world. So it becomes a transboundary economic issue. It becomes a political economic issue. Malaysia as well, we have our own palm oil plantations. So there's a whole web of how everyone is kind of connected in this. The causes are transboundary, the effects are transboundary. So obviously we would hope somehow that the solutions can also be transboundary. So this is where ASEAN comes in. So ASEAN has actually highlighted or flagged transboundary haze as a key issue since 1985. It's already been talked about at the ASEAN level. 1985, haze is a regional problem. We have to do something about it. And the whole process about haze being institutionalized at the ASEAN level has a long history and quite a successful and interesting one, in the sense that if we all know a bit about ASEAN, ASEAN has this thing called the ASEAN Way. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to get things done because there's sensitivities, there's non-interference, you know, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of norms that countries in ASEAN need to observe. So sometimes it becomes difficult for sensitive issues like this to be discussed, to be handled very openly at the ASEAN level. However, for haze, it was quite special because despite all these normative limitations, ASEAN managed to agree on an ASEAN agreement on transboundary haze, and this was especially significant because it is what we can say a legally binding agreement, okay? And we don't really have that many legally binding agreements in ASEAN because that's just how ASEAN works. And it was important enough, all the countries in ASEAN felt that haze was important enough. We have heard how it impacts our society, our economy and all that. It is important enough that we needed this really this agreement that is essentially legally binding. However, along the way, the agreement was signed in 2002, but along the way we have seen cracks in the effectiveness of the agreement. So there were a lot of things that were put into place, but due to various things, they were not able to be carried out. So some of the limitations to how ASEAN can approach the problem, or how effective ASEAN can be in approaching haze, is what was already, some of them were already mentioned before, but I would like to just elaborate on a few things. So one of it is this idea of who is at fault, who is at blame. So we have heard how Malaysia will say that, oh, it's coming from Indonesia, and Indonesia will come and say that, oh, actually it's coming from Malaysia. Sometimes it's not only that, they will say that, okay, it is coming from Indonesia, but it's Malaysian companies who are actually doing the burning. So this is what we call the finger pointing that is not helping the situation. The countries, unfortunately, sometimes spend more time trying to pin blame rather than to actually address the problem. There are also issues like national pride. Okay, nobody wants to admit that they are at fault, and nobody also wants to admit that they cannot handle their own problems. So this is why, even though in the agreement there is written the allowance for countries to offer assistance, for automatic assistance to be given, firefighters, bombers, jets and all that is already written in this ASEAN agreement. It very rarely is carried out because often countries don't want to admit that they cannot handle it themselves. So it becomes a national pride issue. We see a situation where countries would say, even though, let's say, Malaysia offers assistance to Indonesia, Indonesia will be like, it's okay, we don't need it, we can do it ourselves. So this is undermining the agreement that is already there. And finally, the ASEAN Way principles, like I mentioned, things like non-interference. Technically, governments are a bit reluctant, or usually very reluctant, to actually be too confrontational. Yeah, so they will try to write letters and have phone calls rather than being a bit more insistent on what they on sort of pressuring or compelling the agreement to be put into place. So some of the things that has been affected by this. So for example, in ASEAN, we have the ASEAN, I've mentioned the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. We also have a SOP on what should happen. It's called the Haze Monitoring Assessment and Joint Emergency Response. We also have a transboundary haze roadmap. We have a haze monitoring system. We have so many mechanisms actually that are already there that can be used, but due to all of this that I mentioned earlier, is not used as effectively. I will give some examples here. So the first one, the ASEAN Specialized Meteorological Center. This is actually in Singapore, and this center is responsible to monitor and assess the regional fire and haze situation for the whole region. Okay? However, when the ASMC gives out their reports to the region, there often comes a situation where member states are a bit unhappy with how the report shows certain fires coming from certain places. So a lot of the time, the conversations in ASEAN is actually concentrating about member states disputing whether the ASMC data is correct, whether it is acceptable or not. So the regional discussion just stays at that level, not so much on actually implementation of solutions. We also have the ASEAN Haze Monitoring System, which was actually something sponsored by Singapore that enabled a more sophisticated way to monitor haze in the region. However, Indonesia and unfortunately also Malaysia has declined to make their concession maps available for that system to use. So this has actually made it very difficult to link specific hotspots to specific companies. So this makes it difficult to know who is responsible actually for the fires. So this complicates things as well. And under the haze agreement, the last thing I wanted to mention is that we should also have an ASEAN coordinating center on transboundary haze pollution control. Currently, the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta, which by the way has never had transboundary haze before, is actually acting as the interim coordination center. There is supposed to be a dedicated coordination center, but due to all of these political and diplomatic issues that was mentioned earlier, we still haven't been able to establish that. So my point of talking about ASEAN here is that there are a lot of good intentions, there are a lot of mechanisms and institutions that exist, but due to political and diplomatic limitations, they have not been as effective as they should have been. So a regional problem has been attempted to be resolved in a regional manner, but it has been limited because of these limitations. So in conclusion, I want to reiterate that transboundary haze is not transboundary only in terms of its effects, but it is also transboundary in terms of its drivers. So we, Malaysia, are also part of the problem in that sense. We cannot just be repeating and saying that it's from Indonesia, they should be doing something. We have to own up to what we can do for this. So the first thing, which is what we also have in our SUHAKAM recommendation, is the importance of enacting a transboundary haze pollution legislation. Okay, so Singapore has tried this before. They have their own transboundary haze pollution legislation. And it has been successful in some ways and less successful in other ways. And what we propose is that we want to take the example of Singapore, but tweak it in a way that we can use it more effectively to monitor and make sure that our companies in Malaysia and those who are also functioning in Indonesia are not part of the problem anymore. We take care of our own backyard, we take care of our own companies, so that Malaysian companies, we are very confident that they will no longer be part of the problem. This will give us also a stronger standing at the ASEAN level as well, when we can confidently say, you know, we have done what we can. We do not have this now, and this is something very important. So the intention for this is not to catch out or to embarrass any Malaysian company. It is to have that check and balance mechanism. The second one, or the final one, is that Malaysia needs to take more leadership at the ASEAN level. So actually, if you look at the history, the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze was a Malaysian idea. And Malaysia was the first country to sign the agreement and to ratify the agreement. So originally, this was something that was brought to the regional level by by Malaysia. But over time, it has kind of shifted. Indonesia has become more prominent, partly because that is where the problem lies. So they have been more vocal about how the agreement should be interpreted and what role should they play. Singapore has also been more active as well, because they have technology, they have more funds, and Malaysia has sort of taken the back seat. So we are actually involved both in the cause and the solution, and also the drivers and the effects as well. So clearly, we should be the one who are back in the driver's seat. So this is something that we've also highlighted in the SUHAKAM recommendations. Malaysia should come back and guide the process. And hopefully this will enable us to have more of a solid contribution compared to what was there before. So I think I'll end there for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Helena, for your sharings. Okay, so maybe I can just open the questions to the floor. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah, if you have questions, raise your hand. Just mention your name, where are you from, and your questions to. If you want to direct any questions to panelists, yeah, you can let us know. Okay.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Federica. I live in Malaysia for 15 years, 15. Actually, I am a doctor in engineering. I produce electricity from palm oil. I am in this field for almost 30 years, 30. We have a small factory in Pahang, Mentekab, and I'm very sorry to say that I'm not agreed at all for what you say just now, because I consider Malaysia my house and Italy my home. It's very easy to put the finger only in palm oil, but it's not. If there is one control compared to Indonesia, is Malaysia. Malaysia is strictly controlled by MPOB, MPOC, RSPO. The problem, the key point, maybe is the price, very expensive, and the certificate to get the green line of palm oil. I give you an example. You buy palm oil for non-certificate refinery, you have a price. You buy palm oil for refinery certificate, you have another price. The procedure to sell palm oil in Italy under certificate and NIS is 3 times more expensive. When I mentioned this to MPOB at the time with Mr. Balu said, oh, sorry, why? Why we need to do something with the European community in Malaysia, with the European Chamber, with the Italian embassy, if Europe for us is only 1% of the market? We prefer to sell in China, India, that the certification control is very less. And this is the key point for me. About the land of certificate, the fertilizer land and wherever, also for this, the small enterprise, the small farmer is very costing. So we need to go to the beginning. Then Greenpeace is not only against palm oil or in favor of palm oil. For an example, I give you a million examples here. Today we are also against for plastic, and here we are to talk with a piece of plastic here. So what is the point? Plastic in the table, plastic in the bottle. So why we need to put the finger only in the palm oil, palm oil, palm oil, palm oil, palm oil? No, it's not. We need to educate it since the beginning how to grow the item and the issue of palm oil. Indonesia and Malaysia, from the century back, we are not friends at all. We know that. We like each other, we love each other, but we don't marry each other. But the controller about palm oil in Malaysia is 3 times more than, maybe 3 times more than Indonesia. I don't know, sorry, doctor, if you have tried to sell 1 ton from Malaysia and 1 ton from Indonesia. You are crazy. Because the rule and regulation that we have in Malaysia make us more safety than Indonesia. The quality control that we have in Malaysia is 10 times more than Indonesia. But we are only able to put the finger. But what is the solution? The solution is not today, Greenpeace. The solution, for my humble opinion, is organize the small round table, not the big event. Because the big event, after 2 seconds, all of us, we have Instagram, Facebook, phone, because we are tired. So, but the small table with the authority, round table, and face to face the problem, for me could be maybe a small solution. I am a small enterprise. I produce 5,000 tons per month, not too much. I collect all the dirty oil with the help for the DBKL, from KFC, McDonald's, because all of this they throw in the rubbish, they throw in the river. We collect the dirty oil, became sludge, we make green, we all the certificate, we put in the engine and became electricity. I encourage you to take care for the small enterprise, not the big player, because the big player, I don't want to continue. You know, the rule and regulation, FELDA, FELCRA, Sandarbi, you know. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Any response?
Yeah, so these are all, of course, valid points, and I believe that nobody here is saying that, you know, palm oil is something that we shouldn't be doing. And, you know, we all, Jayao, myself, we have been working in this field for many years, and the idea is to make palm oil more sustainable. So we are talking about where are the areas in the supply chain which are problematic. So palm oil, like I mentioned in the past, right, was much worse than before in terms of fires. There have been improvements, and this is because countries like Europe are the ones who are talking about pressuring Malaysia, Indonesia to improve. If not, we won't buy your palm oil anymore. So there is an issue there that we need to unpack as well. But the essential thing is Malaysia is moving forward, but there remains to be problems in palm oil. There are remaining sustainability issues in the sector. That is why we still need things like RSPO and MSPO and ISPO. There are issues that need to be talked about, like fires, which are still existing on plantations, and as I mentioned, more in Indonesia than Malaysia, so that's great, right? But then they still are there. These problems are still here. Okay, so one of the things that I would like to pick up from Doctor's comments there is the issue of selling palm oil to Europe, and expensive. It is expensive. Sustainable palm oil is expensive. Obviously, sustainable palm oil is expensive because you need to spend money to be more sustainable. Sustainable fertilizers are expensive. Clearing land with the proper means are expensive. Not using fire is expensive. So of course, companies who produce sustainably deserves to demand more money for their palm oil, because they are spending more money to be sustainable, to make sure that there is no fires on their land, to make sure that the water level is high enough to avoid fires from happening. Part of the problem is that a lot of buyers do not want to spend the money. And RSPO will tell you that only 50% of RSPO's sustainably certified palm oil is sold at a sustainable certified price. That means that there are so many producers, perhaps like you, who have produced palm oil at a higher cost because you are sustainable, but nobody wants to buy it. So where is the initiative for palm oil producers to continue to produce sustainable palm oil? So the threat is always there. Oh, we should just sell to China and India. That is dangerous because sadly in Asia, even here, there is not that much demand for sustainability yet. So it is also in the interest of us, in the interest of Europe, in the interest of all of these markets who ask us to improve palm oil practices, to buy palm oil at a fair price, so that there will be the initiative for large, medium, small companies to continue to take care of their land, to make sure fires don't occur. If it's no longer profitable to do so, the risk is that they'll just go to unsustainable markets, which is always there. So that is the underlying issue. I don't dispute that it is a price issue. It is a price issue. And the problem is there is not enough support to fund sustainable practices at the moment. So that is part of the problem. The other part that I would like to just quickly respond is the issue about Malaysia being more sustainable. This is in fact, I think, something that we can be proud of. Yeah, it's undeniable that we have. Or like maybe we like to believe that we have better checks and balances. And this was part of what I've talked about, which is the network that we are facing now, the transboundary economic and investment network that we have. We have Malaysian companies in Indonesia, just like how Singapore has companies in Indonesia. Singapore is also very famous for being very strict and have very strict regulations on their companies. But the issue is that how can we be sure, or how can we maintain that Malaysian companies who are functioning relatively better in Malaysia will also hold the same standards in Indonesia? This is what we want. We don't want to be part of the problem in Indonesia or in Malaysia. So at the moment, our legal system does not allow Malaysian government or any other agency to check what is happening in Indonesia, even though it is a Malaysian entity. So this is very important. We want to be able to say that wherever in the world we are, Malaysian companies are really best practice, and we don't have the framework to do so now. So this is what we hope to achieve. Thank you.
So I just want to, grateful for the contrarian view and the feedback. And so my observation is I think this is important to highlight two things. One is that contrarian views, different views, are so powerful because they are the essence of those kinds of progress in terms of sustainability that we have got. Because it is a diverse views and that contribute to better decisions and progress. And to facilitate that, a framework on what is better and what's not good is really important. And we already have got so much progress as a human civilization in terms of what frameworks we want to hold on to and commit to. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because we have agreed about the fundamental worth of every human being, irrespective of how different we may look like and be like. We have agreed among all the 194 countries on the Sustainable Development Goals. Malaysian as well. We are committed to achieving these goals and leaving no one behind by 2030. So the key towards making progress together on these frameworks is including everyone's views. And I think it is really important for us, I'm taking a step back, to get good at accommodating different views, critiquing, and sharpening our critiques as well. So sometimes, so in my work, I'm constantly trying to learn to do that more accurately because when we are critiquing, we sometimes sound like we are championing something. We sometimes sound like we are saying this is the panacea, this is the silver bullet. Or at least people might perceive, because we have different stakeholders, and some might think that, oh, you are saying this is to blame, or it sounds like you're pointing the finger. So I think all these are crucial as a process in terms of maturing and in expanding our bandwidth for sophistication and complication. Sophistication in recognizing that there's so much diversity in our society, and sophistication because of our growing knowledge of the scientific causes and effects and impacts. And so the solutions are many, and they have to be at different levels, at all the levels. So one key sophisticated solution is the market mechanism that we just heard. And that's really complicated and that's really sophisticated, but at many levels, that's only one piece of it, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to appreciate that what's going on, and that a comment that this isn't noise. These are all Lego bricks for building something worthwhile. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Well, yes, I must congratulate you with coming up with something different. But I think it all centers to the existing problems where there are lack of legislation, you know, whether soft law or hard law. But to be realistic, I think to suddenly legislate, to make it that compulsory, is a bit, what shall I say, a bit difficult under the present environment. So we have to start with the soft type of laws where you build up regulations, you know. In order to do this, you come up with a certain quality of goods, for example, the quality of palm oil. So I think here dialogues between countries will be very important so that we can start with something easier. For example, build up some regulations first before legislating. Yeah, that's right. I think that's, and I think on the business side, as far as I know, and I think Q would agree with me, companies like Petronas are really looking into this environmental and social and governance thing so that, you know, it is sustainability sensitive. I think efforts have already been started, you know. So I think what is more important is leadership. Leadership is very important so that, things would move. Without leadership, I think things wouldn't move. And also the role of stakeholders like, the CSOs, the NGOs, including SUHAKAM as well. We all have to play a role, I think, towards improving matters. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have questions from Yuling. Yeah.
Hi, Ko Yuling. I'm a senior economist. I work on sustainable supply chains quite a bit. Thank you very much. I've been with the people in CERAH as well on Haze for a number of years. I actually wanted to share a little bit. I think it's very interesting and positive what's going on the regulatory front and as well as on the market front. Just to note that I think sustainability premiums for palm oil products have actually gone through the roof. We're talking about $20 to $1,000 per ton. I mean, obviously there's different levels of ingredients and whether it's crude, but I think there's increasing worry about shortage. In fact, I think how we calculate whether the RSPO has a surplus or not, I actually think not really, because if you look at the energy and non-energy use for palm oil is actually in relative balance, and the escalation of premiums actually indicates that there's so much demand. And in fact, the EU requirements, I think a lot of people are very skeptical about it, but actually I see it a lot of positive, because then that's even causing even higher demand into these voluntary certifications. And I think one of the great opportunities is that, ironically or not, the EU has actually changed the cutoff date for the market to about 2020. So in fact, that makes everything now possible. You can have smallholders in Pahang, smallholders in Johor, smallholders in Sarawak, actually gathering and providing. I mean, of course, you just need data to show that there's due diligence and that it is non-deforestation and everything. And I think this is where the market will be very convinced if the regulatory side can help. And not only is there this demand from EUDR, but if you talk to the corporations, scope 2 emissions, right? I mean, if you're running a boiler in the factory, you may want to buy renewable diesel. Palm oil goes into a lot of renewable diesel. The people running the airlines, talking to Petronas, they want to buy sustainable aviation fuel. Guess what? That's $3,000 a ton. I mean, palm oil is selling at 1,000, right? So that's $3,000. Who's going to capture the value add of that? The volume is increasing tremendously in this area. And scope 3 as well. I mean, corporations are saying that, this buyer from the Western market wants to tie with us, because not only do they want our product, they want to partner with us for scope 3 emissions. So I think there's an amazing opportunity to partner now with buyers, not just for getting premiums on, whether it's RSPO or something else. They're also asking for, we want a low contaminant oil, we want, mineral oil, low contaminant oil. There's all these value added requirements, and I kind of worry when I look at the global supply chain that it's like, oh, no, we can't be bothered. We just want to do India and China. I mean, why? When you're talking about opportunities which are, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000. And I think the amazing opportunity is actually to move the smallholder oil. I mean, talking about palm oil, the refinery utilization rate is below 60%, by the way. So we're below 60%. Indonesia is so successful at, selling to the global market. Imagine if you could gather smallholder palm oil in Malaysia, and I think maybe this has to be done at the state level, actually. We need to have the right unit of jurisdiction. Should it be federal? Should it be state? Right? And state corporations should do this. And I think the confidence that the market would then have, if you have a multi-stakeholder, exactly what's going on here, people get clarity, people gain confidence, because it's a Malaysian, talking enterprise to get really good product regulation there. And, if you can get our, refinery utilization up from below 60, can you get another 2, 3, 4, 5% going into the EU market, smallholder Malaysian palm oil? I think that's the opportunity. And if you look at other markets, they're not going to pay you a dime more. So thank you.
Right. Thank you, Yuling, for your sharing. Is there other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep.
It's not a question. I just wanted to weigh in on the question, and thank you, ma'am, for those comments. That's very helpful, as Jaya had said, to create a robust conversation on what we're having. And as someone from Greenpeace, I want to make clarifications on how we're perceived. We don't want to pretend to be who we're not. And when I delivered the keynote address earlier, I did not even mention palm oil, right? Because Greenpeace is not anti-palm oil, just to be very clear about that. We don't want palm oil. That results in human rights violations. We don't want not just palm oil, but any kind of activity that destroys the dignity of human beings. We don't want activities that destroy forests, and that relates to an acceptable level of agreement in society on what is good, on what is right, and what is fair. And I think when we all talk about human rights, and that's the beauty of this conversation and linking the environment issues with human rights, is that I think most of us agree on what is good for people, what is dignified for people, and that's why human rights inside this conversation is really important as we try to progress the issue. And when we talk about people having enough to eat, that's very relatable to everybody. And I think nobody will disagree with me if we say we need to have enough food for every family. So there are things that are clearly within an acceptable level of agreement in society. And when we talk about people breathing unclean air, as is the topic of our conversation, that's not fair, especially for people who are not causing it, right? So that then leads us to a better understanding of where we need to sit in terms of all of these different positions or opinions related to the things that we need to do to survive as a society, to progress the economy, and make sure that everyone has a job, everyone goes to school, has health care, and all of that. So it's a complex issue, but when we get to the bottom of what we all care about, and we agree on those things, then I think it's an easier conversation. And that's why we're grateful for that you have raised that, because we don't want to be hypocrites. We want to be very clear that we're trying to all care about a better better world for everybody, not in the way that it compromises other things. So the trade-offs need to be clear to us. And then you mentioned plastic as well. So we campaign vigorously against single-use plastic that you use once and throw away, because that goes into the ocean, that goes into the soil, and that contaminates the food we eat. You don't want to be eating food that is contaminated with plastic. That's really compromising our ability to survive as human beings. And that means more hospital bills for people who have to deal with that. So we're not against plastic per se, because we live in a society where plastic has its use, very convenient use for a lot of things. Even when you visit our ship, a lot of the panels there are made of plastic, and we'd rather use that instead of cutting wood from the forest. So those are the trade-offs, and we want to be clear. There are decisions we make that are difficult. Everything has an impact on the environment, but we try as much as possible to make sure that we minimize that impact, and that we hold to account those who have the power to make decisions if they are not doing their job in creating legislation and regulation that would help, for example, alleviate the price issue. And regulation is one way to do that. And then it's not just within countries like Malaysia. You also lobby in the European Union, for example, not to create decisions that would hinder the way the conversation is happening on sustainability in Southeast Asia, for example. So I hope that clarifies things also from the context of why we're gathered here today on this topic, and why Greenpeace is campaigning all over the world for issues that I think is very important to all of us. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Siap, for making the positions, the statements. It's quite important to make it clear that our positions as environmental campaigning groups. Okay, maybe I go to the last questions. Maybe this is my personal questions to three panelists. Okay, sometimes as a campaigner, I sometimes receive this kind of questions. It's like, when I was campaigning, I saw all this problem, environmental disaster. But at the same time, I was told I need to give hope to the people. Okay, it's very hard. So I think when campaigning for few years of air pollution, few years ago there's no pollution, right? Like no serious jerebu, no serious transboundary haze pollutions because of the La Nina season, because of the banjir, because of the hujan, like the heavy rain, and then it reduced a lot of haze pollutions. But when I look at the news this year, according to the Indonesian government, they say the likelihood of the haze coming back to Malaysia, to Southeast Asia, is 50% because the El Nino is coming back. The drought seasons, El Nino is coming back. Last time, 2015, 2019, because of the El Nino the incident, it made the haze forest fire even worse. And now, few years later, it could be back. So how do we solve it? I know that there are lots of gaps, lots of the law need to be strengthened, but the problem coming too fast. So how can we, maybe I want to ask the panelists, how do we give hopes? Something like, while we are fixing the system, fixing the problems, but there's more serious problem like El Nino is coming, there could be a more serious haze issue. What do you think, in your opinion, what do you think that, do you think that it will be the problem will be reducing because some of the law has been strengthened, or maybe you can give some of the examples? Who want to start first? No.
I'm not sure, really. It's a question of keeping the balance. I think which requires efforts and determination from parties who care about these issues, you know. For example, under the current green policy of the European countries, you know, there is the darker side of it because that impacted the poorer countries. Because by the advanced countries going electric, the poorer countries will have to provide the raw materials like copper, for example. So they keep on digging in a huge way so that, you know, the end product of the dust, the metal, the heavy metal dust will spread around that area, including some towns, which happens, I think, in Chile. Chile has got one of the biggest, in fact, copper mines, open copper mines, you know. And studies have shown that there is already a fact that these heavy metals, pollutants in the atmosphere have caused diseases like cancer, you know, asthma and things like which I mentioned just now. So there is always a price to pay. You know, there's always a price to pay. So that it's important for even the developed countries by going into implementing the green policies to be conscious of the balance that have to be kept in order to create a cleaner environment. I think that is a general comment which I have. Maybe some other panelists have got more specific comments.
So Heng asked about how to have hope. I just want to share a very happy piece of news that just came in 5 minutes ago. Simultaneously, the Malaysian Bar is having their annual general meeting now, and a group of lawyers actually put in a motion to ask the Malaysian Bar to adopt a business and human rights framework called the UN the Guiding Principles, UNGP. This is an important piece of human rights framework that encourages business sector to respect human rights. Long story short, that motion has just been passed in the Malaysian Bar. So this is systemic change. You know, small bit. So what I want to share then in terms of hope is we do what we can within our circle of influence, and you know, we don't have to save the world because it will always look impossible. But we just need to change and encourage others and help others in our own circle of influence. So yeah, I just wanted to share that good news with you. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe just to finish up a bit back into the palm oil issue, I think I've mentioned before that we have seen improvement in the sector. So I think that is itself a cause for hope, even though there's a lot of room. But another layer to that is that even like 10 years ago, the world actually was more anti-palm oil than we have before, than we have now. There was this idea or this notion that palm oil is bad. Yeah, so this was problematic for Malaysia, of course, and for Indonesia. So I think one thing that we can hold on to as a hopeful thing is that around the world, slowly but surely, there is an increasing understanding that palm oil can be grown in a sustainable manner. So the belief that palm oil is evil is slowly decreasing in favor of, there is the possibility that palm oil can be grown sustainably, and we should support this. So I think that is cause for hope for Malaysians, for Indonesians, and I think cause for motivation for people in the industry and everyone else to continue to push for this kind of improvement, so we can keep that balance, like Commissioner said, between the interests of the people, the interests of the country, the interests of the environment on a local as well as a global scale. So I think I'll end there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Helenas. So yeah, just now I was asking like the systemic change. So it's thanks to Jayal that at least he can give some hopes to us. Okay, because I just thinking like how to end this conversation. Like we have so much of air pollution, but I want to give people hope. Okay, luckily Jayal saved me. Okay, thanks for that. So the conclusion is we need more discussions. We need more deeper discussions to understand the feedback from all these various stakeholders. The second one is we need system change, the systemic change, then we can improve it. The third one, if we can show best practices and all of us, we can learn all these many case study and success story from different countries. All of us are humans. Nobody want their homeland to be polluted. Nobody want to breathe dirty air. So we want to survive. So last time when I was campaigning about environments, people just think about, oh, you are just protecting orang-utan, protecting harimau, protecting elephant, etc., etc. But now, air pollution issue, forest fire issue is affecting humans. So it is a bit unfortunate that we cannot save much more the animal. Now we have to save human, because human will be also affected too. So that's why we, together with all these NGOs, we submit our complaints to SUHAKAM so that we can have a systemic change, and we hope all these recommendations will be useful in the future. And again, I hope that in the future that we do not need to use air purifier anymore, because in the future we will have more clean air. I hope this thing, not easy, but we hope if we work together, we hope that day will come. So with that, I think I end our forum today. So I pass my mics, I think hand over to Farida. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for the undivided attention to our forum today. I hope that the fruitful session has encouraged all of you to practice a more sustainable practices to make Malaysia a greener country. So I guess this is the end of today's session, this afternoon session. Again, thank you very much. And after this, all of you are free to roam around here in the Carnival Hall. And for those who are going to ride the boat for the Rainbow Warrior ship, you guys can be ready and be alert when the volunteers are calling for their specific headband. So that's all, and have a good day. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.